What's up, y'all? Welcome back to a brand new episode of Jibreel Talks Comics, and I'm very excited for this one. Obviously, we have a huge stack in my pull list to go over today. We have a new story to talk about. It's been like, 2-3 weeks since we had a story. It's been low-key, nothing for me to cover, so I had to kind of focus on the comics. But now, finally, we're back into the stories. But before I get into the show, I did want to do a little bit, just a small morsel of self-promo. So my first JTC conversation, or Jibreel Talks Comics conversation, is up right now. Shout out to Yoo-Hoo Comics Review, and I'm just so stoked about that episode. It's doing really well for this channel, so I'm really glad that people are actually supporting it and watching it. I'm clipping it out on TikTok, so if you want kind of a small little sample of what that conversation is like, go follow me over there on TikTok if you don't already, and check out those clips and let me know what you think. There's a little bit of audio mixing issues, and I apologize for that. That's totally on me. For some reason, my audio is like super low on it, and is a lot higher, so I'm gonna work on that for future episodes. I know what happened there, so I can do some technical wizardry and kind of fix that. But just wanted to promo that. We also hit 200 followers on TikTok, and I'm so stoked about that. I have a lot of really cool content coming. I have a major collection video going up on this channel probably in the next week or so. I finished it over there on TikTok, so if you want to watch the collection in chunks, you can go over there and see that. But if you want to see like a more comprehensive front to back, it's probably going to be like an hour-long video or something like that, because I'm probably going to take my time with it. That's going to be up on this channel. Keep an eye with that. And then I have future conversations that are in the work right now, and get those edited up and probably uploaded, so you could probably see that sometime within the next week or two, an additional conversation with there. And I won't say who it is. I'm gonna hold back on that, but anybody who follows me on TikTok and is in the TikTok comic space probably will like this episode quite a bit. I'm really excited to talk to this guest. So again, shout out to Yoo-Hoo Comic Review for supporting the channel and coming on my show. I really appreciate somebody coming on the show when it's not even a proven concept. I feel like that's it's hard to sell people on something that like they've never seen before. So it's like, hey, do you want to talk to me for like God knows how 90 minutes on a show that doesn't exist currently, and there's no frame of reference of what that even looked like. So I can appreciate all the people willing to kind of take a shot on it and talk to me, and I think I'm a solid conversationalist. Not the greatest, but certainly not the worst. So I was like, I'm gonna shoot my shot, and people are actually saying yes. And so right now I have, I think, 4 guests lined up, and then I have a short list of other creators I'd like to talk to. But again, I want to emphasize, if you like comics and you're interested in making content about them, you like having conversations, deep conversations, analytical conversations about comics, hit me up and we can probably work out something to get you on the show. Don't worry about follower count and all that. I'm not too worried about that. But hey, if you're a conversationalist, you like talking about comics, I'm down to talk to you for sure. I mean, who am I? I got like 12 subscribers right now. So I'd love to, talk to other small creators maybe, and we can kind of, work together and build something together. So besides that, before we get into the story, I do want to comment on the drink this week. And I'm not necessarily trying to make this a segment, but it's kind of become one over time. So we have a little bit of coffee here. This is an iced coffee. This is an espresso pod. Now, I'm not the hugest Nespresso pod person. We have like an espresso machine. I like it. It's pretty cool. But I have a proper espresso machine right next to it. And the area has a lot of local roasters that I'm in right now. And so I kind of grind my own beans, tamp it down, make my own latte, froth my own milk, do the whole shebang. Today I was like, you know what? I'm a little down to the wire. I need to record the show. Let's go Nespresso pod. So we do Nespresso pod. I iced it down, a little oat milk, just a little bit of Torani vanilla, just something to kind of spice up the palate. I'm a coffee guy, but I don't like too much going on. You know what I mean? Like I'm not necessarily like keep it simple, keep it black. I don't want no flavor in the milk. No. I like a little milk. I like a little sugar, but we don't need to get too crazy with it. You know what I mean? Like we have to kind of set expectations. Let the coffee do the speaking. You know what I mean? The other one should be the accoutrements, the little accents, if you will. But I don't want to get too in the weeds about this. But yeah, if you're curious, I'm like, what is that perplexing brown liquid that he's drinking right now? We're drinking a little iced coffee. A stunning iced coffee. But let's get into the stories. This is a big one that a lot of people have been talking about this week, especially specifically in the comic world. It hasn't really bled too much out there. But this is from CBR, Brian Cronin. Shout out to y'all for the article. Tom Brevoort, or Brevoort, sorry if I'm butchering your name, to take over editing duties on Marvel's X-Men line of comics. So let's get into a little blurb to give you guys a little bit of details and context of what's happening here. So longtime Marvel Comics editor Tom Brevoort, currently an executive editor and senior vice president of publishing, announced on his social media that after 25 years of being the editor in charge of the Avengers lines of comics book, he will be moving over to take on editing duties for Marvel's X-Men line of comics, replacing Jordan D. White. I believe Jordan D. White took over, I think it was right before Krakoa, so I think it's like 2018-ish. And so we've had pretty much the same editor throughout from Hickman's time till current. And it looks like Tom is going to be taking over that. And a lot of people I got really concerned. I've noticed, especially if you go on like Reddit and different X-Men communities, there is an immense paranoia about what the end of this era looks like, what's going to bring about the end, how much longer do we have in this era, because a lot of people do like this era. There are certainly people who don't rock with this era at all, but then there are people who really love what Krakoa brought to the X-Men line. I'm one of those people. I really loved it, and that kind of reinvigorated my love of X-Men. Not that I had fallen out of love, but I've certainly had lost interest for quite a while. Like the last time I had cared deeply about X-Men was childhood, closer to like the Astonishing days, which I know sounds insane because that's like what, 04, 05, 06. So yeah, I was much younger when I actually was like super into X-Men comics, and then from that point onwards there's stuff like Messiah Complex and Extinction and stuff like that kind of it perked my interest a little bit. Evil Cyclops and stuff like that I thought had some interesting stuff in Old Man Logan, but for the most part it had been a while, and Krakoa was the first thing that I was like all invested in. I'm reading everything. I've read everything Krakoa, every series, every single issue, every little one shot. I'm in the Krakoa era heavy, and so I certainly understand some of the apprehension that certain fans have about like this going away and them kind of going to a back to basics, kind of resetting everything. And so they feel like, some people feel that like maybe a new change in editor is going to certainly change the direction that X-Men are going to go in, and it's going to spell the end of the Krakoa era. Now, I don't have any more information than you guys though, so we're going a little bit into speculation mode, but I do want to, let's go with the facts here. So first off, Tom doesn't seem like he's going to fully take over until a year or two. He's still wrapping up some major stuff in the Avengers world. There's events that he's dealing with. So I don't see any significant changes in editorial until, we're talking about maybe the tail end of 2024, 2025, I think is when things are. And not to mention, we have to be real with this. Hickman being present or not, the Krakoa era was never going to last forever. Kieran Gillen, they've been pretty explicit about the fact that they still have this mapped out storyline, and they were talking about on their blog that they still are fully going to execute that. So there's no editorial mandate that's come down already that's like dead everything, we're doing a new status quo. But yeah, like I don't think there's gonna be immediate switch and then they're gonna be in the Westchester house like next year or in a couple months. Like I don't think that's necessarily is gonna be what's gonna happen, because like it or not, like X-Men's doing well right now. Like I haven't necessarily gone into the sales and everything like that. I can't really comment necessarily about the current state of like where it falls on the hierarchy of selling on a month-to-month basis for Marvel, but I think X-Men is doing quite well. They have a number of titles that are intriguing the public interest and stuff like that. So I don't see them necessarily looking at X-Men and be like, okay, like completely turn the ship 180. However, the Krakoa era was eventually going to end, and a new team was eventually going to join. The X-Office was going to change significantly. A lot of the original X-Office people that were there, you have to keep in mind, are not even around anymore. The people we have now, a lot of them weren't there from the beginning. You still have your Ben Percys and stuff like that, and Jerry Duggan is more in charge now, or not in charge, but takes a bigger role now. But they were there in Marauders and stuff like that. But a lot of the original writers are not even there anymore. So, hands change, and sometimes things continue and sometimes things reset. That's the nature of comics. But yeah, like I think it's a fair thing to be like, okay, especially with the concerns that people have about maybe like MCU synergy. Like, what are they going to do to the X-Men line of comics to try to bring it a little bit closer to maybe what the MCU is doing? Obviously, the MCU has not tapped into the mutant thing at all. It's probably going to be a number of years before they do. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a light initiative at Marvel to try to bring things closer, because they know, this is, business 101 in the comic industry, that when there's a renewed interest in an IP from externally, so we're talking about the movies, the video games and stuff like that, there is going to be some degree of people that kind of translate into comic sales. Some of them are going to come over and be curious, or at least look at like, okay, what's going on there? Like, this was really cool. Loved this movie. Loved this video game. I want to check out the comics, where this all comes from. And so that's where that synergy thing comes in. It's like when those eyes come onto the comic world, the Marvel and DC want to make sure that what that audience sees is understandable and comprehensible. And so, yeah, I would imagine to some degree it's a little unsettling for like editorial to know that like X-Men right now is in a pretty inaccessible state in terms of like we're years into a large scale initiative, a large scale story that would be generally incomprehensible to your very casual fans. So I would imagine to some degree they want to bring that a little bit closer, rein that in a little bit. Do I think that necessarily means like hard back to basics? You know, we're going back to the Westchester House, Charles Xavier led Nightcrawler, Storm, you know, like closer to Claremont stuff. No, I don't think we necessarily. I think that could exist in a form for sure, a more accessible maybe line of comics for those fans. But I don't see necessarily all of this progress being vaporized overnight. I think there's ebbs and flows to comics. You know, things advance, things regress, things advance, and then they regress again. But at the same time, I don't see them throwing all this really cool stuff. I mean, do you really think they're just gonna blink out of existence Krakoa and Amenth and all these crazy, the Sentinels and what they've done with Sinister and the lives of Moira? Like, I just don't. I feel like there's gonna be more that carries over then, and maybe that's the naive part. Maybe that's the over optimistic part of me that kind of hopes that they bring some things forward. But anyway, we don't know anything for a fact of what this editorial mandate is going to look like from Tom Brevoort. All we know is that they're going to finish up some stuff with Avengers. As of right now, this second, Jordan D. White is still going to continue doing their thing. The certain authors have already confirmed, specifically Kieran Gillen, that they don't anticipate any significant impact to the stories that they're already telling. So people like me, you fans of Immortal X-Men, X-Men Red, Wolverine, you know, whatever, Jerry Duggan's X-Men, I don't see any impact to those series. But yeah, like this I would imagine is probably the beginning of what that transition into a post Krakoa era looks like. But I don't see any cause for concern just yet. But so all you X-Men fans, like, catch your breath. It's gonna be all right. We're gonna arrive. There's still a good chance that even post Krakoa, we'll have something really fun there as well. And again, Krakoa cannot go forever. Things like eventually it'll get stale. For some people, it's already gotten stale. Destiny of X hasn't been for everybody. You know what I mean? I generally like what's going on in X-Men right now, but like, is it where it was during Dawn and when Hickman was around? No, not necessarily. I still think there are amazing comics coming out of the X Office right now, and I love the Krakoa era, and I will be sad when it goes away, but I like progress. I like new things. I like to see what a new team's vision for X-Men is. I'm with you guys, though. I don't necessarily want a reset back to basics thing either. We've gotten enough of that. I don't want that. But don't be surprised if like Marvel tries to find a way to reconcile these two things, have that progress, but at the same time have something recognizable to a more casual audience to give them some kind of jumping on point right now. Because yeah, if you have a newer comic book reader and they want to get into X-Men, it's not an easy question. There are plenty Krakoa reading orders. In fact, I'm actually working on one right now for TikTok. But it's not an easy thing to do. You have many events, many different series, many different writers. Some are still relevant, you know, from the Dawn days. Some are not, like the Fallen Angel stuff. What do you read? What don't you read? What can you jump into? What can't you jump in? Can I read Judgment Day without, like, there's lots of questions. And so I think it's kind of Marvel editorial's job to rectify that issue. And I do think that's an issue eventually. You know what I mean? You can't just keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper unless you're totally fine with new fans not being able to jump into your new IP, or not your new, but your existing IP, which the inaccessibility of comics is a docking point constantly on comics, where people are like, hey, you can't read American comics because you can't jump in because there's decades of lore. Us who read comics know that things reset all the time. You just have to jump in when a new run comes in, and 9 times out of 10 you'll be fine. But at the same time, I do understand the apprehension to keep going in this direction indefinitely. You know what I mean? So that's our story for today. We have a huge poll list, so we should probably get started on that. But before that, quick coffee break. Do you guys like coffee? Let me know down below. I want to talk to you coffee lovers. If you don't like coffee, frankly, you're going to get blocked. But let's continue. Poll list. First one, we have X-Men Red by Al Ewing. Now, actually, before I start on my poll list, I do want to say this. I have 13 books that I got this week, and this cost me upwards of 70 something dollars. And it was a clear thing that when I was checking out with this, I was like, you know what? This cannot happen again. I'm running out of space. I'm spending too much money on a week to week. I have to start transitioning into trades again, like I used to. So as a heads up, guys, this weekly poll list thing, it's gonna shrink a little bit. It's not gonna evaporate. I don't think there'll be a show that comes where I have nothing physically pulled, but I'm going to be gravitating more towards digital single issues and then buying the compilations. So the omnis, the trades, the oversized hardcovers, the absolutes. I'm moving back into that direction because it's the most economical thing to do. It's the most sensible thing to do. So just as a heads up, this is probably going to be the heaviest week in a while. I think I have maybe 1 or 2 weeks in September that are pretty heavy too, but then past October things are going to drop off a cliff and we're going to go closer to maybe 3 to 5 books a week. But again, I'm going to be reading as much as I did before, so don't worry. It's not like I'm going to be reviewing things. I'm just going to have less physical comics. So this is the standard cover A for X-Men Red. This is the Al Ewing joint. And we talked about this a little bit last week when I was telling you that this was something I was excited to check out this week. This is, I guess, what you could consider the formal start of what is called, I guess, the Genesis War. Taking over Arakko from the Circle. Basically, I wouldn't say that like Storm's been formally deposed, but she is basically leading now a rebellion force against Genesis forces, and she's trying to take over. And yeah, it's a particularly precarious situation where Earth is pretty much taken off the table, and you have now a situation where the forces left on Arakko that are resisting Genesis's control don't really... they're kind of on their own. And so this was an excellently, beautifully written comic. I was very impressed by what Al Ewing was doing there. And yeah, I'm very excited to see where this goes and what the implications are for this. I love how self-contained what Al Ewing does, in the fact that like it certainly bleeds outwards. Like the events that happen on Arakko, you hear about in other books for sure. But at the same time, he's kind of in his own world. I love what he did with Sword that kind of led into X-Men Red, where he kind of stays in his thing, and that's what I like. That it's very Ben Percy-ish in a way, where you got the Percy verse. In some ways, you have like the Ewing verse of X-Men, where like X-Men Red is kind of just doing its own thing in Arakko. It kind of stays on its lane and explores that, and it's doing new things, and that's what I love how underderivative this series is. So if you're looking for something very different, that's not your normal X-Men come together, save the day adventure, I don't know, fighting Orcus, whatever, this is a whole different book. It's a whole different lineup, a lot of brand new characters, which I love that they're not only pulling on legacy, but they're in fact kind of moving forward with things. And I think this book is going to have massive implications, especially now that, and this is something I kind of called many months ago, where we all got the sense that with Orcus kind of moving to get the mutants off of Earth, chances are they would have to go abroad. And we've already saw some talk about like Chandalar and different places that can become mutant safe havens. Spoilers, I guess. And again, don't watch the show if you haven't read a lot of these comics, because it's going to be massive spoilers. So apologies for that. But this book becomes more and more important now that we've basically become a post-Earth mutant society. Now that they've kind of gone through the gates, you only have a handful, probably a little bit more than a handful of mutants that are still on Earth. That's where you'll get your Dark X-Men's, your Alpha Flights, your Jerry Duggan's X-Men. All of those kind of explore that world. But all the rest of mutantdom, that is either you got Exodus and Hope and Destiny with the rest of the, I don't know, 250,000 or whatever in Nowhere, No When, or whatever it's called, in Immortal, that's being explored. This is where you get the rest of the story right here, and the cosmic portion of the mutant story becomes that much more important now that they're kind of been driven off of Earth. And so things are kind of splintered now. You have the mutants in different areas, and I think this is one of the 3 pillars of must-read mutant material right now if you want that complete story. So highly recommend you check out X-Men Red if you somehow have not yet. We have Dark X-Men #1. We have a couple of brand new series this week, and then we also have some series wrapping up. So it's been kind of an interesting week in that way. So beautiful Madeline Pryor on the cover, and I'm really loving this cover. It's so intense. I love the colors of it. And yeah, this was a really fun book. And this was one that I kind of had my eye on because I love Madeline Pryor as a character. I was a little off put by some of the stuff that happened in Dark Web, but at the same time, Dark Web was actually very helpful to her character because her and Jean had that moment in the Dark Web X-Men tie-in little miniseries that they had. I think it was like 2 to 3 issues or something like that. And so if you guys don't know, this is just a little bit of context. Madeline Pryor actually had her memories restored, so she's kind of not walking around as this incomplete being like Ben Reilly is anymore. And she is leading the Limbo Embassy, which is positioned very strangely now that we have a post-Krakoa world and Orcus has taken over. But countries have been forced to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Limbo Embassy, despite the protests of people outside. And so we're getting a couple cool things here. You have this really weird, eclectic lineup of characters in the Limbo world right now that are kind of seeking safe havens. And they pull from a lot of weird characters that we haven't seen in a while. I think like Children of the Atom was the last book that I saw that kind of even referenced some of these characters. And so that was pretty cool. And then on top of that, one of the most interesting things for me personally, because I guess maybe I'm a relationship hound, I love the interrelationships between these characters, is the dynamic between Madeline Pryor and Havoc specifically. We haven't seen a lot of that stuff. It was dabbled in again, the Dark Web X-Men tie-ins. You got some stuff. And the last time we saw Havoc in large amounts was like Hellions or something like that. Zeb Wells did during the Reign of X years. So it's been a while, and I'm so glad to see just some progress and then just see what the dynamics of their relationship even looks like. Because you got to wonder when you have these really disparate type of people. They're kind of from 2 different worlds at the same time, and they've kind of fallen in love with each other, and we know they've been together for some time. I'm like, what does that even look like, that their day-to-day? We've seen the Scott and Jean stuff a million times, but what does Havoc and Madeline look like on their day-to-day? And we got some insight into that. So I'm not going to spoil the major things that happen towards the end. There are some major events that happen. I don't think those are going to stick around. I think those could pretty easily be undone, especially when you're talking about somebody of the power of a Madeline Pryor, the weird, ambiguous, open-ended type of fixes that can be offered from the Limbo world and the dealing and stuff like that they do over there. But yeah, this was a really, really fun book. So if you're looking for something kind of interesting to read post-Fall of X, this is one to check out. Next is another number 1. We have Uncanny Avengers. I believe there's Jerry Duggan written as well. We have Psylocke on the cover. I'm really psyched about this book. So this one's pretty interesting because this is straight up exploring, okay, where does that leave the Avengers in relation to what happened at the Hellfire Gala? Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but they were called away due to kind of like a false flag thing happening with Captain Krakoa. And we still don't know who Captain Krakoa is. There's lots of guesses. We can get into that. But yeah, this was actually pretty interesting book, what that looks like. And it was really interesting to see kind of Cap take a very anti-Orcus, by any means necessary, co-signing Psylocke and everything that's happening there, approach to that. And I liked it. But yeah, I was a little surprised by it. Just he's like, yeah, we're opposing the fascists. I'm all with it. And then he kind of has this interesting lineup of the Uncanny Avengers kind of mixing with the mutants and kind of co-signing their cause, immediately essentially putting him on the outs with the, I guess, general human sentiment. We get some interesting information, and we'll get more into Alpha Flight as well, but you'll know that we've learned through this week's X-Men comics that a lot of countries have taken kind of a formal banning straight up approach to the mutants in their countries, and specifically we're talking about the United States and Canada. And so that's really interesting to see him immediately go against, I guess, the general mandate of his country in Captain America and kind of lead this team to protect mutantdom. So I thought that was really cool, kind of bringing Cap into the mutant world. I thought this was a pretty strong book, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Again, this in some ways kind of requires you to read to fully understand the context of where we kind of kick off the story. There obviously is that free comic book day Uncanny Avengers book that I highly recommend you check out. And then also there is the Hellfire Gala that kind of leads to like, okay, what happened with the mutants and why weren't the Avengers affected, and where does that kind of leave them after? So very interesting stuff here. Another one was just one that I had pre-ordered. I love this cover. We have Marvel voices for the X-Men this time. I didn't really know what to expect, but we got some fun stories in here, different characters. We got some good Jubilee stuff. We got some good Gambit and Rogue stuff. So overall, I liked this a lot. Bobby was in there. So I enjoyed this. This is just a fun collection of stories. Anybody who's read Marvel Voices can get a general idea of what this is going for. And this just is a celebration of what the X-Men mean to so many different marginalized communities that kind of consume this content. You know, it's very queer friendly, and I just love what they're doing with these Marvel Voices series. I try to pick up most of them. I have probably missed a couple because they do them pretty often, but yeah, not too much to report on this one, but this was a fun read. And this is a big one I actually want to take some time to talk about. We have Daredevil number 14. Daredevil number 14. I keep mispronouncing it. This is the end of Chip Zdarsky's run on Daredevil, which is kind of mind-blowing, you know what I mean? It's been a number of years. I can't remember exactly when he jumped in, but it's been probably a good, 4 years or something like that he's been writing Daredevil. And I jumped in late, admittedly. I started reading Daredevil a couple weeks before Dark Reign. So I was definitely on board for these last 14 issues, so that's kind of like the renumbered second core of his time on Daredevil. I've read all the first stuff, but I had to catch up on trade. I wasn't there kind of week to week. But yeah, what an amazing run. And even though I didn't love the direction that they got when they go a little bit too supernatural, and it had a lot of the same themes and it kind of overlapped with what was happening over there in Jason Aaron's Punisher, even though I didn't love some of that stuff, you can't deny that first half, especially up to Dark Reign, how strong that material was. Just the art was gorgeous, the writing was top notch, the characterizations, the unique cast that they brought in, and the mix of new characters and legacy characters. Chip Zdarsky absolutely killed it, and I love to see that they actually really stuck the landing. I thought this was a very compelling issue. It kind of answers the question, past Matt Murdock effectively dying, and now we can see him kind of coming back into the fold. It doesn't fully answer how that happens. It kind of shows that how he kind of came back and doesn't seem to have his memories, but it leaves him and Elektra in kind of an interesting spot where she's kind of just glad to see that he's around, as painful as that is, the effective disillusion of their marriage. But he's kind of gotten triggered back into his memories of remembering Daredevil. How much he remembers, we don't know, but he kind of springs into action, seeing somebody being attacked at the end of the series there. You get some good Foggy stuff there as well. So yeah, an excellent issue. I love this variant that I got. It's really, really cool, and I'm just so glad to see this wrap up on a high. And next year the Omni's coming out, and I'm absolutely going to be picking up that. I can't wait to just reread that in its kind of full collected capacity. So yeah, definitely recommend you check out this run if you haven't thus far. The good thing about it is I feel like if you start with, Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil number 1, not the second renumbered number 1, but the original number 1, you'll get a good idea of what's going on pretty fast, so long as you understand the general gist of his origin story. You don't need a ton before that. It would have helped if you read, some Charles Soule, Brubaker, Bendis, the major runs. It would have helped if you've read that kind of stuff, but at the same time, I think there's the perfectly accessible meets doing something new run of Daredevil, and I'm just so glad it landed well. Next up, we have Spider-Man number 11, another series ending. This is the adjectiveless Spider-Man, so don't get it confused with Amazing Spider-Man. This is the Dan Slott written and Mark Bagley drawn series. And this entire last half of this specific 11-issue run, after they did all the multiverse stuff, they did another Spider-Verse miniseries there. It was okay. It was basically Shathra being the main antagonist, and you got Moreland coming back, and some people were kind of unwritten out of the Web of Destiny, and it kind of set some things up for now Spider-Woman's coming back and stuff like that. So you got some interesting stuff. It positioned Silk kind of interestingly. But out of that Spider-Verse event, you get Spider-Boy, who I guess the idea, I'll give you guys a quick rundown on it if you don't know about him. This is a character that I guess Dan Slott's been wanting to do for a while, but couldn't because the name Spider-Boy was already being used in relation to the Amalgam universe. If you don't know, Spider-Man and Superboy had kind of a crossover in the 90s in the Amalgam universe, which was something that Marvel and DC did. It was kind of like a shared universe initiative thing that they did. And so from what I understand, the Spider-Boy name was kind of like co-owned, but they seem to have worked out something where Dan Slott was able to properly make a Spider-Man sidekick named Spider-Boy. It's a young boy named Bailey, And so we got some interesting context about his past. It sets it up perfectly for his solo run that's going to be starting, I think, in a month or two. Quick break. And so, yeah, you get some good context for what happened there. You get some great information about what the dynamic between him and Peter looked like, how he got trained. It answers a lot of questions about Bailey's past. Because obviously you had that situation where Bailey has all these memories, but Peter doesn't. And if Peter doesn't, we don't. We don't know about Spider-Boy. And so Dan Slott, I think, is just taking the time to kind of fill in those blanks to kind of give you a more complete picture of that character. So when you go into the solo run, you go into, I guess, in a more informed position about whether you're even interested in this character or not. And so overall, I like Bailey. I think he's a cool character. I love the suit, the fact that the power set is so different. I appreciate when they introduce another spider character, but they do something different. And Bailey, I think, is one of the more, not the most, but one of the more literal spider-powered spider heroes, which I can appreciate. So he has the literal like mouth and fangs and stuff like that, and the multiple eyes, and they show how he learns to control his powers and stuff like that. I think there's some really interesting stuff here. Now, quickly, let's talk about this Peach Momoko cover, how beautiful that is. I'm so glad that I was able to get this cover as the kind of the last book of this specific run. And overall, I thought this run was fine. It's not my favorite Dan Slott stuff ever. I'm a huge fan of Mark Bagley just because, I grew up on Ultimate Spider-Man and I loved his work there. So naturally, when I saw Dan Slott, Mark Bagley, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, like I'm down for this. What they ended up doing was cool. It's by far not like terrible stuff at all. It's not transformative in any way. They don't really do too much to kind of like change the status quo or anything like that. But it does set up a lot of cool stuff going forward. So if at all you kind of have any interest in the Spider-Boy character, this is must-read material. Like, this is where he comes from. I think it's like issue 6 or 7 like that. And I know that was a big deal because that's like technically a first appearance. And everybody's like, get it. It's going to be a collector's item. It'll probably be worth, I don't know, $30 when it's all said and done. But yeah, I thought this was a pretty fun series overall. And I liked it because it kind of had, in some ways, a classic feel, especially with that kind of electro vibe. It gave that early Dan Slott kind of vibe to it, which was an interesting kind of contrast between that and what ASM is doing right now. So overall, pretty fun series. I'm not mad at it. Next, let's get into some Night Terror stuff. We have Night Terror's Wonder Woman. I love this cover, and the only unfortunate thing is I have this variant cover, and you have them, and it's seemingly, you got Diana and Nubia above what looks kind of like a corrupted Well of Souls type of situation, and unfortunately you don't seem to get that storyline in here. Diana and Nubia's stories still kind of remain separate in this one, and that's kind of an unfortunate thing. But I actually really liked this book because one thing, it continues to kind of analyze that dynamic between some of the quote-unquote hypocrisies of Wonder Woman, where she is this kind of like protector of peace, but at the same time is like a great warrior and a bringer of war at times, and uses these really harsh methods to stop these enemies that otherwise are being condemned for their usage of violence. So it's some interesting kind of analysis of the character, generally speaking, and kind of just forces Diana to kind of reconcile with her own belief systems and what she's bringing to the world, and is she human or not, and I think the most interesting thing that they kind of analyze there is her relationship to her own godly nature, and the fact that she kind of comes from Zeus, and from a genetic makeup perspective, she is this demigod that kind of occupies this space between humanity and gods, but at the same time she in many ways is actually more god than human. And so kind of where does that leave her identity wise? And I thought it was a very Superman-esque kind of approach to her kind of questioning her identity, and I actually really appreciated the book. So overall, I thought this was a pretty fun Night Terrors tie-in. Didn't do much for the general Night Terrors plot line, as most of the tie-ins don't really, but this I think is one of the more interesting approaches to the Night Terrors event. Next one we have is Night Terror's Punchline. I didn't love any of these covers, to be honest with you, but this is probably the one that I was into the most. And I thought this was a pretty decent book. Overall, I would say this is definitely what I was hoping they would have did in the first one. The first one, it was literally almost just felt like a chase sequence between her and this kind of demented form of Barbara. I believe it was Barbara. So it's kind of like a cyborg version of her, and she's getting chased by Batgirl, and it's a whole thing. This one actually takes the time a little bit to analyze her relationship with virality and the computer presence and social media presence that she leveraged a lot, especially in those early days when you read that kind of like the trial of Alexis K type situation. Not quite like Joker War punchline, because that she was already kind of working with the Joker at that point. But when you go trial of Alexis K and you kind of get a little bit of a peek into what those early days as her as kind of like a social media person looks like, an influencer, if you will, with her apology and all like that, and just her kind of control of the masses through that thing. They didn't take a look too much about other aspects of punchlines, so you don't really get too much like Royal Flush Gang and stuff like that. Kind of keeps it limited to her relationship with the online stuff, and there are some literal embodiments of her kind of struggle online and kind of chasing with the forums and the judgment and all that kind of stuff. It was cool. I'm not mad at it at all, but certainly one of the less necessary. It's not the least necessary. You got like Angel Breaker and stuff like that I don't know why they're even involved with Night Terrors. This one, a little less important, but for you punchline fans, it's more punchline, so you can't complain too much. Next one's pretty interesting. We have some Night Terrors Catwoman. And what I like about this one, more than almost any of the other ones, this is like I think my second or third favorite of the tie-ins related to Night Terrors, is because they really did take the time to create a proper Elseworlds tale. And I really appreciate what they did here. So shout out to Tini Howard. You know, their run on Catwoman, I think, has been a little bit divisive. Like, some people really like it, some people really don't like it, especially when kind of compared to previous runs of Catwoman that immediately kind of were previous to it, like Ron V's and Joelle Jones and stuff like that. And so, but what I've liked about Tini Howard is, on the main kind of Catwoman run, is the kind of interrelatedness to some of her other properties, the way that kind of Catwoman tied into like Punchline, the Gotham game, and she has this kind of Tiniverse underground of Gotham thing going on that I think is pretty compelling stuff. This goes in a completely different direction, which is why I was so surprised by it. I thought it was going to be more of that kind of her having nightmares about just her time trying to fight the different gangs and Gotham and stuff like that, and it's actually not really any of that at all. It's a whole different world where there's a new Batman, and they're trying to hunt down a Joker that is trying to, it is like much newer, and it has actually a whole different ideology that I think is really interesting. You have Catwoman's sister that is also kind of a superhero and kind of struggles with her faith in relation to whether she should be doing this. And obviously you have Catwoman, who is not a woman of faith, just like her sister, and you have the kind of struggle between her and her sister of like, the sister knows that she's kind of up to no good, and you know, Selena is trying to just have her trust the process a little bit more. It's just a really interesting take on Catwoman, and I appreciate that like in 2 issues they were able to kind of create a proper beginning, middle, and end to an Elseworlds tale. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on this book because they're probably assuming it's just kind of standard Night Terrors fare, but this is actually doing something very different. So love what they did with Catwoman, love that cover. Let's get into this one. Harley Quinn, Black, White, and Redder #2 with this gorgeous Joelle Jones cover. Again, I'm a huge fan of Joelle Jones. I love, you know, Lady Killer, stuff on Catwoman, the stuff on Wonder Girl. Just, I'm a huge fan. And so when I saw this cover, I was like, oh, I gotta get this. And this was otherwise probably a series I'm still probably going to drop. Like, I'm probably not going to pick it up physically anymore. But I saw this Joelle Jones character. I'm like, you know, or a cover, and I'm like, you know, I'll get one more. For you guys that don't know, this is a general kind of compilation series in the lane of like Batman Brave and the Bold, the DC Pride stuff, the Marvel Voices stuff. This is just another compilation of stories here, just the unifying factor. And Moon Knight had a Black, White, and Blood. Like, there's all these different kind of Deadpool has one, Darth Vader has one. This is Harley Quinn's. The main selling factor on it is you have different writers writing stories, and the art style is all kind of in a grayscale mixed with red type of thing. I think some of them are more entertaining than others. Overall, nothing significant to write home about. There is one, I think, short that they have in this book that I think is particularly compelling about just analyzing Harley Quinn's relationship with the Joker and the fact that she feels like intrinsically tied to him, this abuser, frankly, no matter what she does. And so she literally is working with Zatanna to alter her origin story to kind of have that separation between her and Joker, and no matter what she does, she ends up kind of connected to him. And so by the end, she kind of learns to love her and her own story, and the fact that her story is not she's not the sum of what her experience is, but at the same time, she wouldn't be who she is if she didn't go through those things. So it was kind of a little heartwarming story. I appreciated what they did there, but nothing like significant to write home about. Got a couple more books here. Hawk Girl #2. Look how beautiful this cover is. I love that. And I know I say I have a lot of beautiful covers, but I really appreciate a lot of the different covers that I got this week. So a really vibrant cover here. And yeah, Hawk Girl continues to be a really, really fun series, surprisingly so. And basically this is her struggling to kind of let go. Obviously, she has her kind of previous reincarnated versions of her in her head, and she's kind of struggling with that. She has her new, I guess, roommate, you can consider it, and the relationship they have as being effectively a non-human trans character, and just how they navigate that. A trans lesbian character, actually, at that. So they have their own set of struggles, and then I kind of go out. And so you kind of get this dichotomy between, like, Hawk Girl going out and trying to have fun and enjoying her life, but at the same time being hunted for their wings that I never know how to pronounce it. Is it nth metal? Something like that. They're getting hunted for their wings, and they have to manifest their powers, and now they've effectively been discovered as Hawk Girl. So it's an interesting thing. I'm excited to see where the series goes. I don't know if I'm going to continue it physically. I'm probably going to switch to digital on this one. I don't know if these are ones that I need to have physically, because again, I'm really dynamically assessing my relationship with single issues and which ones that I actually really need in my collection versus which ones I want to continue reading and I want to get the full story, but I don't necessarily need to collect it. And if I decide I do, I could just buy the trade later on. So yeah, I highly recommend you if you like inclusive, fun, interesting, thought-provoking series, I think there's the one that for you for sure. Great representation on that one. Second to last, we have Batman White Knight Presents Generation Joker. This is book, what is it, 4 or 5? Yeah, 4. This is a Black Label series from Sean Murray's White Knight series. This is one that I thought has been good. Katana Collins has been writing on it, and I think she's done a good job with it. Is it the most compelling White Knight stuff? Not really. It's probably the least interesting of the various spin-offs that the White Knight universe has had. I liked the Harley Quinn one probably a lot better than this one. But overall, I thought this series so far is okay. You basically have, in this issue, the Joker's children going to Mr. Freeze this time because apparently he has a lot of experience. In fact, he actually created the initial AI mapping of Jack Napier's mind to be able to project his consciousness into now, and they obviously want to bring him back to life, and Mr. Freeze and Harley, frankly, understand the danger of what that means, because if it's a full mapping of his brain, even Jack knows that means the Joker's still in it. And if you guys remember with the White Knight stuff, he kind of struggled with keeping the Joker stuff reined in his last days. So even he, I think, is apprehensive to kind of coming back to life. It's only really the kids that are aligned with that happening. And then in the tail end of the series, you have kind of Batman re-entering the fold, and so you would imagine maybe in the last issue or two he's gonna help kind of wrap this up. Overall, I think this is a cool story. Is it necessary? I guess it depends when it's all said and done. If this leads to a kind of a somehow reanimated Joker, I think that could be pretty interesting to kind of see how we got there. And it also kind of takes the time to analyze just what is it like growing up as the child who kind of idolizes this guy that the world knows was not great, but at the same time was a troubled guy and did a lot of good as well. I think it's an interesting kind of approach to the series, but like, is it must-read material? Probably not. It's the White Knight series set a really high standard, so I totally understand that. Like, if you have that in your title, it's going to have everybody maybe judge you a little harder than maybe you ought to be. So that's the only thing. You know, and we kind of came fresh off the White Knight Beyond series. It's like the Batman Beyond type series. And I thought that, from what I understand, that was like really well received as well. You know, obviously people love Terry McGinnis and all that. So you know, like they were fighting an uphill battle with this one. And I think overall they're doing pretty well. Is it my favorite White Knight series? Of course not. But I think they're doing their thing. And then lastly, the last physical book I got this week is Wonder Woman War of the Gods #2. Not much thoughts that I have to give on this. This is a classic series. I'm still actually rereading this issue. I'm only about halfway through it. It's a little bit dense material, so it takes a little bit of time to get through. And here, I'm just going to move my coffee so I don't accidentally knock that down. But, you know, it's cool. It's like a classic event. If you're into like early 90s kind of freshly post-crisis events in the Wonder Woman space, I think you should give this a try. It's kind of George Perez in some ways at his best, in my opinion. You know, he's really killing it back then. And the cool thing is you kind of have the scenario in and of itself, I think, is probably the most interesting part. Maybe the execution lacks a little bit at times. People seem to like War of the Gods more than I do. And again, this is from a massive Wonder Woman fan. But this is one of those events where I think the premise of like what happens if the Roman gods kind of challenge the Greek gods for control of Olympus, I think that's like really cool, especially when you see the literal different versions of the gods, Jupiter versus Zeus or whatever, fighting each other. I think that's like super interesting. But when it's said and done, especially if you haven't read a lot of the side stuff, which I had, but it's been quite a while, you don't fully understand. There's a lot of like quick left turns, so the pacing is a little weird. So certainly, this series I think shows its age a little bit, but I'm really glad they're reprinting it. It's cool to have it on like this really quality printing. But yeah, that is my pull list this week. So let's get into what else I read. These are just some digital books that I want to get into. Some I have some thoughts on, some we're going to move pretty quickly past. Let's get into Batman Superman, World's Finest number 18. This was a really, really fun issue. Again, shout out to Mark Waid. The art is just gorgeous. And this is a really fun series. Basically, you get some classic Batman and Superman stories. This one, we get basically the origin of them working together. And so seeing that early dynamic between Clark and Bruce, I think, is so interesting, and kind of how they come to trust each other and when exactly do they reveal things about each other. And naturally, Bruce finds out about Clark's identity, but Bruce almost immediately gives up his because he knows that eventually Clark is going to be able to see through the walls and see the Batcave and kind of ascertain things. So rather than deal with all that, he's kind of forced to trust Clark a little bit. And then that naturally leads to questions like, okay, when does he start his contingency plans and investigating things about how to take Superman down? Because anybody who knows Batman knows that he immediately moves to do that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a really fun thing, and I enjoy what they were doing with this series. So not too much more to report beyond that in terms of a plot perspective. We have Night Terror Superman number 2. I thought this was pretty fun. You have kind of Clark continuing to fight, and then Supergirl breaks out of her dream and kind of joins him, and they kind of work together. You get some interesting stuff about like Supergirl and stuff like that. I liked the first issue. Probably I liked then a little bit of this. This one didn't really do a ton for me. I thought it was entertaining enough though. Night Terror's Nightwing number 2, I think, is actually quite a bit of fun. This is basically Nightwing continues to be in this weird warped version of Arkham, working with Edward Nygma to break out. You have this kind of like messed up version of Barbara as well in there. So Barbara's really going through it during this Night Terror's run. And I continue to really love the art for this one, and it was actually a really interesting dynamic to kind of see Nightwing and Riddler work together in that way to kind of break out. And yeah, I thought it was really, really fun. And I believe it was Riddler. I don't think it was Scarecrow. I might be mistaken on that. Correct me down below if I'm tripping. We have Tales of the Titans number 2. This was Raven focused. And as you guys know, I got a physical version of the first Tales of the Titans because I was Starfire, but there was this beautiful foil cover that I was able to pick up. I didn't plan on picking up any of the others other than the Donna Troy version because I know that's going to be a Wonder Woman tied-in thing. So I'm going to get Tales of the Titans. I think it's number 3. That's Donna. And then number 4, I think, is Garth, if I'm not mistaken. So Tales of Titans number 2 was pretty cool. We got a Raven story here trying to save a mother from being in the Trigun cult and dedicating her life and kind of making the same mistake that her mother did. And overall, it was a pretty fun story. You also have a fun little look into the dynamic between her and Starfire. And Starfire doesn't get involved in terms of the actual like mission that she's on to save this mother, but rather is kind of a support system on the side there, as Raven kind of just struggles with her sense of belonging and identity in relation to where she comes from. That's kind of a reoccurring storyline in relation to Raven, is like when you come from a really messed up dude. It's kind of like Doyle Dormammu's kind of storyline you see in like Strange Academy. Like, where does that leave you? We get a little bit of that, and so in some ways Raven gets to physically embody the resistance against her father by literally fighting his cult. So, in that regard, I thought it was pretty interesting, and seeing her kind of infiltrate the cult and stuff like that. Next one, let's get into a little bit of X-Men here. We have Alpha Flight number 1. Now, mind you, I want to put a huge caveat on this. I do not have a lot of experience reading Alpha Flight previously. I think I've read a couple issues from some 80s stuff. I don't know if it's like 86 or something like that. So I've read some Alpha Flight before. It's not really my jam. I don't know too much about them other than they're kind of like Canadian superheroes and stuff like that. So, from that's kind of where my knowledge kind of begins and ends. But this book overall I thought was pretty cool. Like, do I think it was like mind-blowing stuff? Does it necessarily change my general sentiment on Alpha Flight and like I'm a huge fan? No, not necessarily. I didn't dislike them or anything like that to begin with, but this doesn't really like save it for me. But I do like I like how they're kind of bringing everything into the X-Men universe, and maybe it's because I'm biased because I like X-Men, but seeing them kind of bring in Iron Man and now Alpha Flight and all these different heroes into our world. The Avengers now are in the X-Men kind of universe as well. Kind of seeing Alpha Flight being brought in, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when you kind of consider the fact that the Canadian government has to respond to the mutant issue, with America being there. If Canada doesn't take a hard stance against mutants, naturally it will become a mutant safe haven, which public sentiment doesn't seem to be in favor of. So Canada takes a pretty hard stance against mutants and basically brings in Alpha Flight. First off, they purge their mutant members, which is super grimy, but at first, and then they use them as a way to kind of fight against the rogue mutants in Canada. But then, spoiler alert, at the end you find out that they're actually working in conjunction with some mutants, and the whole team of Alpha Flight is together, and they're all kind of on the same page, and they're kind of just playing the government and stuff like that, and Orcus. So it was a cool issue. I'm excited to see where it goes. I think there's only going to be like a 5 to 6 issue one, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of these Fall X are like mini series, so like Uncanny Spider-Man, Dark X-Men, Alpha Flight, Realm of X, Jean Grey. I think these are all going to be kind of shorter series, if I'm not mistaken. But some of them might get the Deadpool treatment. Deadpool got 10. Next up, we have What If Dark, Moon Knight #1. I actually liked this one a lot. Of the different What If Darks that I've read, this one is probably my favorite, because I think so far we've had 4 of them, and I've read 3. Because I read the What If Spider-Gwen, I read What If Loki, but I didn't collect it physically, and now we have What If Dark Moon Knight. And I thought this was probably the best of those, and it's really interesting. It's basically like what happens if Marlene gets powers at the beginning on behalf of Ra, which is interesting. And after Mark Spector is killed by the Bushman, and Bushman kind of gets hunted later on, and it's just cool to see kind of, it's not the Fist of Khonshu. I don't know what the formal term would be, but basically she's like a fighter working on behalf of Ra. And just at the end there, spoiler alert, see her kind of psyche be taken over by Ra in her body as her kind of, I guess, her soul kind of passes on after she kind of avenges Mark formally. I thought that was a pretty interesting, kind of fun What If series. It's not when they say like What If Dark, part of me almost thinks like, okay, these are going to be like kind of like tragic stories. And some of them are like kind of sad when it's all kind of said and done. In terms of like Spider-Gwen, for example, where like Peter stays dead, but Gwen Stacy stood dead in the Death of Gwen Stacy storyline in Spider-Man. Spoiler alert for that, I guess. But this one I thought was an interesting ending for sure, but I wouldn't say it was like a dark timeline. You know what I mean? I thought it was more of like a compelling kind of Elseworlds tale. So I thought What If Dark was really, really fun. I highly recommend you check this one out. Next, let's get a little Percy action. We have Ghost Rider #17, and for you guys that don't know, this is a crossover right now between Wolverine. They're working together. They had a co-book, I think it was like Weapons of Vengeance or like that, like last week, and so basically it's going to be a 4-part, I think, mini event, which is interesting because Wolverine seems to be working on a lot of events lately. You got his collab with Ghost Rider here, and that's Ben Percy joint, and then Ben Percy's going to be working with Victor Laval on the Sabretooth War thing, which is going to effectively work as the 3rd Sabretooth series, which I'm stoked for. But besides that, we won't get a lot. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Let's get into Ghost Rider #17. This continues the storyline that was kind of set up with the Weapons of Vengeance one-shot, where basically, and that was kind of a look at the first time they worked together. It kind of wraps that up where the first time they met, and now it moves into modern day where him and Johnny Blaze are working together to hunt this, I guess, what originally was a kid, probably not a kid anymore, with these insane powers to kind of, it seems like they're hunting mutants, and there's some kind of a cultic tower thing that they make with all the body parts. It's really graphic stuff, but I thought it was a really, really fun series, and they're kind of hunting clues and following this trail of death, but they can't seem to catch up quite there. So yeah, I thought overall really fun book. I think Benjamin Percy's absolutely doing his thing there. Let's get into Star Wars Darth Vader number 37. Again, I'll make it quick. This is me jumping into a bunch of Star Wars books, finding a way to find a jumping in point using this Dark Droid storyline. And so this is still in line with that. Basically, and again, I apologize, I don't know a lot of the context of what's happening in Darth Vader because I'm actually jumping into the deep end here, so which you could say is stupid, but I don't have like endless time to like reread like 37 Darth Vader issues, so sorry. So I just jumped in, and basically it sounds like Darth Vader's has some issues with his connection to the Force, and it kind of goes back to his insistence on kind of brute forcing his way through it, and so he's kind of forced to remember some of his old lessons with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan about, you know, instead of trying hard to move the Force, you know, let the Force move you, and that kind of stuff. I think is kind of interesting to see kind of an adult Darth Vader remembering back to his early Anakin days, and is obvious insistence on being, you know, in frustration with having to even remember back to those days, because he insists that like Anakin's dead, but obviously he needs to harken back to some of that to kind of restore that connection to the Force. And he has, I think, this like shield staff thing that kind of builds your connection to the Force, and he gets recruited to take out this droid situation. So it's pretty interesting stuff. This Dark Droid event, the one thing I'm interesting about is this is like a 6-month event. Like it's like gonna be involved with like 6 different series or something like that, 5 or 6 different series over like 6 months. It's like going until like December. So I'm like, oh, what the hell is up with that? I don't know. But yeah, overall this was a fine book. And then lastly, let's talk about the Invincible Iron Man Annual #1. This is also part of the Contest of Chaos event that's happening related to like coming out of Midnight Suns. We had a Spider-Man Wolverine one. Now we have an Invincible Iron Man one. It's him basically fighting against Storm. This event continues to be kind of a weird one because I don't fully know why they're doing it. Like I don't really know the point of this book. Really, it was just a weird combo, I thought, like Storm and Iron Man. I'm not mad at it, but I'm just kind of like, I don't know what we're doing here, really. But overall, I thought it was fine. We get some cool flashbacks to Storm's past. You get some good like Storm Solo Series 80s stuff. You get some look of some of the major screw-ups that basically Iron Man gets triggered by Storm by her bringing it up. Storm, it's like obviously like a crystal doppelganger version of her. But they end up fighting each other. It's a fine matchup, I guess. And then eventually, just like in the Spider-Man Wolverine one, Storm is taken away. Then you get kind of like a small side story at the end there where Spider-Man is working with Jessica Jones to kind of investigate what the hell is going on. And Jessica Jones lets him know, like, hey, it looks like Iron Man and Storm were fighting each other. He's like, how'd you find that out? And she's, because I looked it up on the computer. So it's cool enough. It seems like you have kind of Spider-Man and Jessica Jones looking into the like macro level, like what's happening here and how can we counteract it. But yeah, this is kind of just a weird event. I don't really know much of what to do with this event. I'm going to continue reading it because it has a series of one-shots, and I think there is a Spider-Gwen one-shot for the Contest of Chaos that I pre-ordered because it has an amazing cover. So I'm going to be getting that, but I'm going to continue reading the rest of these digitally. But yeah, it's fine. Maybe when it's all said and done, it'll kind of bring all the different things together and we'll get like a fun battle royale and it'll be a nice little action flick there. But I don't really know what they're building towards there. And so that's everything else that I read this week. There is a couple of indie books that I didn't quite get the chance to get to. I'm still working on Something is Killing the Children, so I will report more about that next week, so apologies for that. And also Star Signs, that's Solid in a Med series. I haven't gotten the chance to read that either. I really focused on DC and Marvel this week that I was like, oh man, I forgot to read my indies, so sorry about that. And I don't collect any of those series physically, unfortunately. So let's get into our pick of the week. If there is one book that I need to choose this week, it's probably going to be from my physicals, and I am going with, you know what, yeah, Daredevil number 14. Daredevil 14. Why do I keep screwing up that name? But yeah, Zdarsky absolutely killed it with this one. And it was tough. I think X-Men Red is a close, number 2 right there. But I just absolutely love what Zdarsky did. And I think this is for sure going to go down as one of the definitive modern Daredevil runs for sure. Like, I think when you think about the big three modern, I'm doing like 2000 and onwards, I think it's going to be like Zdarsky, Bendis, and Brubaker, personally. There's a couple other ones, definitely, like there's a Charles Soule fans out there and stuff like that. But yeah, Zdarsky, he absolutely killed it, and I got to give him a shout out there. So let's get into some quick reading recs for next week, what I suggest you check out. We have The Amazing Spider-Man number 32. This is not quite the gang war thing. I think that's not going to kick off formally until next month. So we're going to get kind of a short, it seems like Queen Goblin and Kraven storyline. They've alluded to it previously that they're kind of in some kind of entanglement, some kind of romantic exchange there. I don't really know much about it. I don't know if they're dating now, but I guess they're going to work together to hunt Spider-Man. Could be interesting. I don't know. We have Dark Knights of Steel number 12. I recommend this for sure because this is the end of that series. If you like DC and you like fantasy, and you're not reading this, you're out of control. Like, you go check this out ASAP. This is a surprisingly good Elseworlds book. I've actually really, really enjoyed it. I don't collect them physically in single issues. I buy the hardcovers. I have the hardcover volume 1. Very excited for hardcover volume 2. That's going to have 6 through 12, if I'm not mistaken, or 7 through 12, the issues in there. And then it's a 12-issue series, and you get the whole thing. And I thought this is just a banger of a series, and I can't wait to reread it in the hardcover format because I read those first 6 issues so long ago, and I forgot a lot of where it started. But it's just such an interesting take on. You get a little bit of Game of Thrones there, so you have these different aristocrats and different power centers, and you have the Amazons and the kings, the Kal-Els, and some people don't like them because they're aliens, and you have Batman in relation to that, and the Knights or the Robins. It's super interesting stuff. I love this series, so definitely check out this last series that's ending. We have Night Terrors number 4. This is the penultimate mainline issue of the Night Terrors thing. As you know, Night Terrors is gonna, I think it wraps up in August, so we have 2 more. We have Night Terrors number 4, and then we have like Night Terrors Night's End or something like that. So we're nearing the end. The Nightmare Stone has made its appearance, so things are gonna really come to a head. Insomnia is probably gonna come and clash with Deadman and Batman and Robin and all of them. Now that a lot of the heroes have kind of broken out of their respective dreams, I'm excited to see kind of everybody face off into each other and see what that kind of ending looks like. We have Deadpool number 10. I believe this is the last issue of Deadpool. So as I said, a lot of series ending, a lot of series beginning. It's kind of like a transition now. We're kind of going into the fall slots now. Deadpool continued to be an absolute banger of series. Shout out to Alyssa Wong. I thought it's just such a hilarious, fun series. You got romance, action, great art. For some reason, is an X-Men tie-in. I don't understand, but I'm definitely going to be picking this up in trade for sure. We have the Invincible Iron Man number 9. That last issue was an absolute monster of an issue, kind of tied into the Hellfire Gala. So I'm excited to see what the implications are. Just it's so interesting. Iron Man is not something I would have expected to get pulled so seamlessly into X-Men world, but it's working. I like the relationship between him and Emma, and obviously they're getting married, and that's going to be a whole thing. And obviously, there's strategic advantages to that, but I'm just curious about to see where they're going with this, and I think Jerry Duggan's absolutely killing it on all these books, which is crazy because I remember when he took over for Hickman, I was so confounded. I was like, really? Like Jerry Duggan? And again, I liked him. I liked his stuff previously, but we're talking about like Hickman, the GOAT. I expected them to go, funnily enough, like in more of an Kieran Gillen or Al Ewing direction, where somebody who's going to really take crazy shots. And, at first, Jerry Duggan was like, okay, he's doing his thing. I know he wrote Cable as well, and I thought that was a pretty fun series. And I loved Marauders. That was a lot of fun. So I was like, it'll probably be a fine series. He did some great stuff for Orcus. I won't lie, though. Since he's taken over, now he hasn't taken over the X office, but he's the one in charge of Fall of X. He's absolutely killed it. So I have to admit, when I've been mistaken, like Jerry Duggan, I'm actually really impressed with recently. So yeah, shout out to him. He's a very consistent quality writer. We have Immortal Thor. If you like Immortal Hulk, no brainer. I am absolutely going to be jumping into this one. I can't wait to read that. I haven't read Thor in a long time. I can't remember the last time I read like an ongoing Thor series, if ever. I mean, I may have never been weekly like current with Thor. I've just kind of read previous runs, and I've like dabbled in Jason Aaron's, but I'm not up to date on that. So I'm super excited to see what they do with Immortal there. We have Night Terror's Detective Comics #2. Now, usually I don't really name the tie-ins for like recommendations, but Detective Comics continues to be like just an absolute monster of like one of those tie-ins. Like I was really impressed by the art. It's ominous. It's dark. I think it's fully taken advantage of what Night Terror's really is, like the waking nightmare idea, I think. And it's not just about horror, it's about self-reflection, and I think Detective Comics is just nailing that, having Commissioner Gordon surrounded by these beings of immense power, and him kind of being that powerless human trying to just navigate and make a change. But it's like, what do you do when you have the fragility of just humanity? So and maybe I'm looking into the symbolism too much, but him like literally crumbling, that kind of symbolism there of that fragility of the humanity in relation to these almost godlike beings, I think is so interesting. So yeah, definitely check out Night Terror's Detective Comics #2. Got a couple more here, couple #1s that I highly recommend you check out. We have Jean Grey #1. I'm absolutely getting that. I have a Derek Chu cover that I pre-ordered that I'm like stoked for. We have Realm of X #1. I think this is going to be more magic focused. I'm so psyched for this one. I love magic. We have the Penguin #1. That's another Tom King joint. If you like Tom King, this is a no-brainer. Tom King back in the Batman world, you know, he did Batman Killing Time not too long ago. The Penguin #1, from what I understand, is spinning out of some of the stuff that was put in James Tynion in the Forts run. So, because, you know, Penguin died, and then you got some stuff in relation to Catwoman in there. So this is going off of that. And then lastly, we have a little bit of indie action. We have Indigo Children #6. This is, from what I understand, the end of the arc. So I believe the series is still going, which is exciting. I hope it does. I'm excited to see kind of how this all clashes when you have the Indigo Children, I guess you would call them, in relation to those who are hunting them, and finally them clashing and ending the chase, and more so kind of the inevitable climax of the situation. But yeah, that series continues to be just a monster. So that's our show, Jibreel Talks Comics. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be back with another episode next week. Probably. I'm on vacation, so I might take a little bit, a couple of days off. So it might be on a different day, but I will be doing a show for my general pickups next week. So keep an eye out for that. Also, again, check out the Conversations series that I have. By the time this comes out, only one will be out, but then a couple of days later, I expect my second Conversations episode to be out. So go check that out as well. And yeah, that's Jibreel Talks Comics. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.